Yes! Fear the almighty power of my forces. Cower as they pillage your homes and weep as they take your children from your very arms. Drop card.
Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. We've been hard at work in the bar and grill, slaving away over our Sumo hot stove, but now it's time to unveil our official Banzuke prediction for the July 2026 Basho. This one is mostly straightforward, so our focus is going to be on a handful of key sections, but those sections impact a dozen wrestlers or more in all, so let's get started. The math is done, so as always, let's start at the top. Hoshoryu with his 0 wins stays ahead of Onosato with his 0 wins. They remain our 2 Yokozuna. Kirishima with his 12 wins at Ozeki will press ahead of Kotozakura with his 3, and Aonishiki, who is not even going to be in Ozeki next time. So Kirishima goes to Ozeki 1 East, Kotozakura to Ozeki 1 West. Atami Fuji, Sekiwake 1 East with a 9-6 record, he's gonna stay there. Kota Shoho, same record at 1 West, he's gonna stay there. Wakataka Kage, 12 wins at Komusubi 1 East, that's going to see him into a new Sekiwake slot. But Aonishiki is dropping from Ozeki with his second straight losing record, and a Kadoban Ozeki coming down always goes to the back of the line. So that's going to put Wakataka Kage at Sekiwake 2 East and Aonishiki at Sekiwake 2 West. Now the question's been asked, and it's very reasonable, what happens if somebody else makes Sekiwake in the next Basho without any of these guys moving? So, Atami Fuji is really not on an Ozeki run. Kota Shoho is not on an Ozeki run, but if they get winning records, they're going to stay at Sekiwake. Similarly, Wakataka Kage is really not on an Ozeki run, so with him, a winning record will keep him at Sekiwake. Now, Aonishiki, if he gets 10 plus wins, he'll go back up to Ozeki. But what happens if he gets 8 or 9? He stays at Sekiwake. Which means it's entirely possible for Yoshino Fuji or Oho to end up with 11 or more wins, and by tradition, they're supposed to go to a new Sekiwake slot, which would be Sekiwake 3, a 5th Sekiwake. And the fact that there's only 2 ranks listed means a lot of people think there cannot be more than 4 total Sekiwake. Truth is, there can be any number. There's not a rule that says they must only have 4 Sekiwake or Komusubi, and there can never be any more at all for any reason. It's just, there's never really been a reason to have more than 4. So we just, for simplicity's sake, forms like this will just have 2 ranks for Sekiwake and 2 ranks for Komusubi because you basically never need more than that. If it comes to it though, if that exact set of circumstances arises where there's 4 winning records at Sekiwake and an 11 plus at Komusubi, they should just make a 5th Sekiwake slot, give a 3rd row to the Sekiwake. So there you go. If there's something I don't know about the rules, so be it, and I'm sure I'll be informed, but there you go. If you wondered that, there's your answer. As for the Komusubi, Yoshino Fuji with his 11-4 at 2 East, he is an easy pop-up to Komusubi 1 East, and Oho, as the only other guy who can fill that other Komusubi spot, he jumps up from 3 West with his unbelievable miracle of a 9-6 record. Now for the actual stuff that might be a challenge. Fuji no Kawa is going to go up to 1 East, and Takano Sho should go to 1 West. Their 7-8 records should keep them in place because nobody was able to take those spots from them. Now, it has also been pointed out that nobody has ever remained in place with a 7-8 record at Maegashira 1 East. It is very common for 7-8s to stay in place at a bunch of other ranks, but it's never happened there. The last time somebody from Maegashira 1 East was 7-8 was last May. That was Wakamoto Haru. So he's Maegashira 1 East, he's 7-8. Mathematically, he goes to Maegashira 2 East. Aonishiki, he was 11-4 at Maegashira 9 East. So he was actually tied with Wakamoto Haru. Now we might expect the guys in the Joy to get the advantage, and in this case they didn't, but that was the Basho where Takayasu with his 6-9 record only was demoted a half rank to Komusubi 1 West, whereas nobody had ever stayed in the Sanyaku, even from Sekiwake, with a 6-9 record in the past. So a lot of people thought Aonishiki was actually going to go up to Komusubi. That didn't happen, but it makes total sense, especially when you look at Aonishiki as a hot prospect. which they have given a little bit of a bump to guys like that, Ono Sato being a prime example, when they want to get them into the highest ranks a little bit faster. So it's not really a shock, especially since we thought Aonishiki was going to end up at Komusubi, for him to end up at Maegashira 1 East instead. That bumps Wakamoto Haru back, that bumps Oho back, and that's totally fine. That's actually pretty reasonable. In this case, Churanaumi is the next guy, and he's at 3 East. So he's behind Fujinokawa by a full rank anyway. He's behind Takano Sho, right? Because Takano Sho was 2 West and Chura is 3 East. So there's no reason for them not to leave Fuji at 1 East and Takano Sho at 1 West. That's based just on logic. Then you look at that Takayasu situation where they did something that broke with all precedent from the past, and there's no reason to think they won't do something a little bit different here as well. So we're going to slide Churanaumi up to 2 East. The next question is, who goes ahead between Gonoyama and Hakuno Fuji? Gonoyama should take this tiebreaker. Not only did he wind up with a Sanyaku schedule due to all the absences, he beat 4 of them in 5 days before dropping one to the eventual champion Wakataka Kage. Now, Hakuno Fuji did end up in the Yusho race and beat Kirishima in that clutch-ass Day 14 match, and being in the Joy, the top 16, has not always meant winning these tiebreakers, but it commonly does, so we're going to give this one to Gonoyama. That bumps Hiradaumi over a half rank to 3 East. Daisho should stay yet again at 4 East with his 7-8 record, and we just start sliding people up in order. Ichiyamamoto, Ura, Oshoma. Now Fuji Seiyun at 7 and 8 could only go up to Maegashira 6 West. That means if we scroll down a little bit, we got Takayasu here. 6 East is reasonably the first spot where there's a gap that he could be used to fill in. So is that gonna happen? Well, let's look at the situation. Takayasu coming down from Komusubi with essentially a 2 and 13 record. 2 minus 13 is -11, so he's at Maegashira 11, in this case, West, right? That puts him 3.5 ranks behind Kotoeho, 3 ranks behind Shodai, and 1.5 ranks behind Wakamoto Haru. Yeah, he's a half rank behind Asanoyama, but Asanoyama can only go up to 10 East, so he's not relevant here. Now, the Banzuke is done differently now than it used to be, like we just said, so history as precedent doesn't really work that well a lot of the time. But in very specific situations like this, 2 wins at Komusubi that don't happen a lot, I do like to look at history to see what's happened, even if I have to take it with an hourglass worth of salt. If someone put salt in an hourglass, I think it'd look cool. Anyway, since 2004, when Makuuchi was standardized to 42 wrestlers, there's been 2 wins at Komusubi 4 times. 2 of those instances are basically useless. 2014, 8 and 7 Tamawashi was over-promoted ahead of Komusubi Takekaze, which is a decision we would not expect to be made now. And in 2016, Kotoyuki went from Komusubi to 8 West, but everybody ahead of him was decently ahead of him mathematically as well, so there weren't really any decisions to be made. Now, if we go back to 2009, which is really far back, but it was a situation where Toyono Shima, he only dropped to 6 West, which is similar to the position that we're looking at now. So it's worth seeing what happened on this one. So again, mathematically, he's down at 11 West, right? Well, he finished at 6 West, so he ended up between Tamanoshima, coming up from 15 East, and Homasho, coming up from 16 East. Plus 7 for these guys, so from 15 up to 8 East, and 16 up to 9 East. That meant he was 2.5 ranks behind Tamanoshima and 1.5 ranks behind Homasho mathematically. He ended up being sandwiched by them. But also, Takamisakari, who was 6 and 9 at 5 West, mathematically that puts him at 8 West, which is 3 ranks ahead, but he ended up at 7 West behind Toyono Shima. And yes, Takamisakari had a losing record, but how winners and losers are treated relative to each other has fluctuated quite a bit over time. So that being the case, and with the math not giving us a decent guide on its own, this is too old to be any kind of a precedent that we can use. This brings us to the most recent occurrence, which was actually Takayasu. Back in January 2024, he went 2-4-9 and dropped to Maegashira 8 West. Now, in that basho, Tamawashi was 8 and 7 at 10 East, so mathematically, he went to 9 East, whereas Takayasu was down at 11 East, 2 ranks behind, and Tamawashi finished a full rank ahead of him at 7 West. Onosho was 10 and 5 at 14 West, so he mathematically 9 West, a rank and a half ahead of Takayasu. He ended up right ahead of him at 8 East. Both of those men had to be substantially over-promoted for that to happen. Meanwhile, Hokuto Fuji, who only had 4 wins at 3 West, mathematically that puts him at 10 West, a half rank ahead of Takayasu, he ended up right behind him at 9 East. And Kota Shoho, who was tied with Takayasu, having gone 9 and 6 at 14 East, he ended up the next spot down at 9 West, a full rank behind Takayasu. So this entire situation became a question of, okay, how much grace do we want to give Papa Bear? How much grace do we want to give the fact that he was a Komusubi, and there are these guys who are a little bit ahead of him? Do we want to put him ahead because he was a Komusubi? They decided no. These winning records would go ahead of Takayasu, and Takayasu would only end up ahead of the one losing record that was near him, Hokuto Fuji, but that was also mathematically very close, so it's hard to know if they were doing it on the basis of the difference in what they quote-unquote earned, or the fact that Tamawashi and Onosho were winners, and in this case, Hokuto Fuji was a loser. And to be honest, I think it was a little bit of both. So that gives me this as a broad takeaway. Kota Ueho is well ahead of Takayasu and had a winning record, so I think he should definitely end up at 6 East. Wakamoto Haru, he had a pretty bad record. He isn't that far ahead of Takayasu, so I think he's going to end up behind. Not a guarantee, but that's what I tend to think. Now, Fuji Seiyun, in theory, they could say, well, we definitely want to demote Fuji Seiyun, and then the most logical person to put in that spot is Takayasu, because Shodai would only go down 1 rank in that case, and that is all kinds of messed up. Takayasu would be the most logical option. But in that case, Takayasu would not be viewed as having earned his spot at 6 West. He would just be the lucky beneficiary of them deciding to demote Fuji Seiyun at all costs. I don't want to rely on that. So we're going to leave Fuji Seiyun where he is, and then it's Takayasu then Shodai, or Shodai then Takayasu. I think it's going to be Shodai ahead of him. Yes, I think it is definitely possible they'll look at Shodai and be like, no, a rank and a half isn't enough, bump him down 2, Takayasu can go to 7 East, and that is fine. But that 3 rank gap, even if they don't do it mathematically like we do to figure this out, I think they're going to instinctively see there's such a big gap between those two that they're going to leave Shodai in front. I am much less convinced of this than of Kota Ueho being ahead of all of them, but I do think this is more likely. And then that brings Wakamoto Haru up to Maegashira 8 East. I also think it's possible, I actually think it's a little more possible that Takayasu ends up behind Wakamoto Haru than ahead of Shodai. So if that gives you an idea where I'm at with this. So Shodai 7 East, Takayasu 7 West, Wakamoto Haru 8 East. Now Asanoyama, he is stuck at 10 East because he was 7 and 8. I should scroll that back up. That means Roga gets the next spot, a huge promotion on his 9 and 6. Now we've got Chiyoshoma, Tobizaru, and Fuji Ryoga. Now of this group, Fuji Ryoga should end up ahead of Tobizaru. They were both near the bottom, Fuji had the better win total, so that is that. The question is where Chiyo goes in relation to them. And because they're getting bumped up so far, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Chiyoshoma ends up between them. Now with Fuji being the young and on the rise, I think he definitely goes to 9 East, so it's really between Chiyo and Tobizaru. And I think this one could go either way, but I'm going to put Tobizaru in front just because, honestly, that's the more fair thing to do. They don't always do the thing that's more fair, but Chiyoshoma did pretty poorly and he's still getting an under demotion, so I see no reason to stick it to Tobizaru in this case. Now, given how many different ways this could go, the one thing I'll tell you if you are a Guess the Banzuke player is that Fuji Ryoga should end up somewhere at Maegashira 9. That is it. Other than that, it's pretty much vibes. But this is what I've got. Fuji Ryoga at 9 East, Tobizaru 9 West, Asanoyama 10 East, Chiyoshoma 10 West. Now, next on the list is Takeru Fuji, but he's coming up from Juryo, so we're going to leave him alone for a minute. Instead, Wakano Sho should go to 11 East and Matake Yumi to 11 West. Asahakiryu should go to 12 East, and then the questions really start. Where do we put the Juryo guys? There are a couple of shorthand ideas that you can use to try and help yourself out in a situation like this. One is, generally speaking, if there is a guy in Makuuchi who had a winning record, he'll usually stay ahead of the guys coming up from Juryo. Now, there was a recent instance where that didn't hold, and here for the most part when I show these, I showed their next rank, but in this case I'm showing the previous rank. So Fuji Seiyun, he came up from Juryo 1 West with an 11-4 record, and a lot of us thought he was going to end up behind Asahakiryu with his 8-7 record, which would have put him all the way down here. But they moved him up further because it would really have been unfair for him to only go from 1 West up to 16 West. That's like 2 ranks. So there is a limit to that, but that is a very common thing that you'll see. However, we are out of guys in Makuuchi with winning records, so that doesn't help us here. Another thing you can look for is anyone who was in Makuuchi mathematically should have ended up in Juryo, but was brought back to fill out the division. So in this case, from 2025, you have Shishi, who was Maegashira 11 West and was 4-11. So that means from 11 West minus 7, that puts him out of the division. And the Juryo guys all ended up in front of him, right? Now, Kaio could not have gone any higher than 16 East, so Hidden Naomi ended up ahead of him. Kota Shoho only got demoted from 14 East to 15 East, but minus 3 to 17 East would have still left him in the division, and he ended up ahead of most of the guys coming up from Juryo. The only guys he was behind were the ones who did extremely well, and he couldn't end up ahead of all of them because then he would have gotten no demotion, which is a thing that they only do for a 6-9 record in very, very unusual circumstances. But not only is that not a thing in this case, but we actually have to kick Asasuiryu out because we have too many guys who have earned a spot in the division. So you've got a bunch of guys who are in Makuuchi who mathematically should stay in Makuuchi, and that gives them, on average, a better chance of staying ahead of those who are coming up from Juryo. To make matters a little more complicated, Asakiryu, he's behind all the other guys, so we can treat him a little bit separately, but we've got Abi, then a half rank behind Nishiki Fuji and Kinbozan, and then a half rank behind Shishi. So 4 guys within a rank of each other. Should Takeru Fuji end up ahead of them or behind them? If he should end up in the middle, where does he go? Is there a spot that makes more sense than the other spots, or is it just an arbitrary decision? Well, is there anything from the very recent past that might give us a clue? If we go back to that March Basho, where Fuji Seiyun was promoted ahead of a bunch of guys, he went to 13 West, and that gave Nishiki Fuji exactly 3 ranks down on 6 and 9, Mitakayumi exactly 1 rank down on 7 and 8, Midori Fuji exactly 3 ranks down on 6 and 9, and Chiyoshoma exactly 3 ranks down on 6 and 9. In fact, Kinbozan got over-demoted in the process. So that's a situation where they took the Juryo guy and used him to make sure every guy from Makuuchi, even though they should have stayed in the division anyway, made sure they got moved down at least as far as they were supposed to, and in one case even further. But the very next Basho, this past May, Fuji Ryoga is the only one who was mathematically pushed out of the division, and he's also the only one that Wakano Sho and Ryuden ended up in front of. Now, Ryuden was only 9 and 6, so let's not worry about him. Fuji Seiyun was 11 and 4, Wakano Sho was 11 and 4, and Takeru Fuji is 11 and 4, so let's compare them against each other. But what makes them different? Well, Fuji Seiyun was Juryo 1 West. Wakano Sho is Juryo 3 West. Okay, he was a little bit lower, so he actually moved up more ranks even though he ended up further down. Well, where's Takeru Fuji? Juryo 2 West, so he's right in the middle, so that may not even help us very much. So there's an awful lot of possibilities. In fact, the only thing that I think we can pretty much rely on, and even this is no guarantee, but that at least should happen, is Kinbozan and Nishiki Fuji should end up next to each other because they're tied. That's it. I'm going to make sure they end up next to each other, but other than that, lots and lots of things are possible. So let's do this. Let's compare the Juryo guys to each other. Takeru Fuji is 1.5 ranks ahead of Kazuma. Kazuma is 1 rank ahead of Onokatsu. Onokatsu is just a half rank ahead of Daiseisan. So Onokatsu and Daiseisan really should end up next to each other as well, though again, it's not guaranteed. What tends to happen with the Juryo guys coming up is that whatever mathematical distance there is between them, it is compressed, not expanded. Sometimes it's kept the same, and they will expand it if they think it's the definite best thing to do, but you tend to see it compressed more often. Now, in a lot of ways, that's just an offshoot of limiting how far these guys can go up, but it's something we can at least try to work with. So if we want to keep Takerufuji within a rank and a half of Kazuma, and Kazuma within a rank of Onokatsu, what can we do to make that happen? Well, if we put Takerufuji at Maegashira 12 West, and I should mention, Maegashira 13 has been kind of the limit for Juryo guys, but the one time in the 2020s that someone coming up from Juryo went to 12 West was when Maegashira was only 16 ranks deep, so it is a little more possible here that he goes to 12 West. But if he goes to 12 West, then the only way for Kazuma to be within a rank and a half is to be at 14 East. So Abi and then Nishiki Fuji and Kinbozan, but then if they're going to stay next to each other, then the only way this works is for Kazuma to be at 13 West. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's way too high. If you just do pure math, Kazuma ends up at 13 West, and that basically never happens, especially if he's at Juryo 6 to start with. He's going to be brought down some. So if he gets brought down, Takerufuji needs to be brought down. Now, to get Onokatsu and Daiseisan out of the way for the moment, the best case scenario they can hope for, really, is Onokatsu to 15 East, Daiseisan to, Onokatsu to 15 West, Daiseisan to 16 East, and then Asakoryu at the bottom of the division. To keep Kazuma within a rank of Onokatsu, then he has to go to, at best, 14 West. Him ahead of Shishi, that's actually not too bad. And then Takerufuji, to stay within a rank and a half of Kazuma, he goes to 13 East. So then we have Abi at 12 West, Takerufuji 13 East, Kinbozan 13 West, Nishiki Fuji 14 East, then Kazuma, Shishi, Onokatsu, Daiseisan, Asakoryu. And I don't actually think that's that bad. I think this is actually a pretty reasonable looking outcome. But let's think everyone back a little bit and see how that looks. So first we want to move Kinbozan and Nishiki Fuji together, and then we'll drop Takerufuji to 14 East. If we do that, then he's probably not going to end up next to Kazuma. He could, but I doubt they're going to allow Kinbozan to only go down a rank and a half, and then Shishi 3 whole ranks, despite being right next to each other and having had the same record. So we're going to move Kazuma into 15 East and Shishi to 14 West. Now, for the most part, guys with 9-6 records coming up from Juryo go up more than 1 rank, but in that previous example, Ryuden only went up 1 rank. So it's definitely plausible that Asakoryu ends up ahead at 15 West, Onokatsu and Daiseisan go to the bottom. And if they do this, we probably get Kazuma slid over, Asakoryu to 15 East, and then we have this layout. Takerufuji to 14 East, behind Abi, Kinbozan, and Nishiki Fuji, but ahead of Shishi, then Asakoryu, then Kazuma, Onokatsu, and Daiseisan. Now, what could be wrong here? Well, for one thing, Kinbozan's only going down 1.5 ranks in this case. And you know what? I think the most likely alternative to this layout is Takerufuji going to 13 East ahead of the two of them. In this case, I think Kazuma probably ends up at 15 East ahead of Asakoryu, but again, that is actually pretty reasonable. But let's slide everybody back and take another look at things. What else might be wrong here? Well, you've got Shishi going down 2.5 ranks against Kinbozan's 1.5. Even if they think 1.5 is fine for Kinbozan, they may not want to have that kind of a disparity between the two. Now, because Kinbozan and Nishiki Fuji were tied, if Kinbozan goes ahead, then Shishi's gonna get a bigger demotion. There's no way to avoid that. But maybe that leads them to put Shishi ahead of Takerufuji. This is also possible. For Guess the Banzuke though, I'm gonna put Shishi at 14 West. For one, given all of the permutations, I just am trying to find the guys who I think have a most likely landing spot, and I think 14 West is Shishi's most likely rank. Plus, the committee has shown that if they're unhappy with somebody, they will take it out on their rank. If you recall, if you were following the sport at the time, when Chiyoshoma hanked Hoshoryu, the Yokozuna, to get a Kinboshi, a gold star, they absolutely tanked his rank on the next Banzuke. They put him behind guys who he absolutely would not be behind in normal circumstances. It is possible that they view Shishi's Henka of Tamawashi in a similar light. Now, it's less likely because this Henka didn't cost the JSA money, but they could have viewed it as messed up enough to push Shishi back a little bit. So I think this is what I'm going to go with. If you want to do something a little bit different, but you think that this looks mostly okay, I think your most likely change that you're going to want to go with is Terufuji ahead of Kinbozan and Nishikifuji. I think this is very likely. And like I said, I think Kazuma ends up ahead of Asakoryu if they make that move. But I'm going to go with Abi at 12 West, Kinbozan 13 East, Nishikifuji 13 West, Terufuji and then Shishi at 14, Asakoryu, then Kazuma at 15, Onokatsu and Daiseisan at 16, bringing up the rear. And that's our official Banzuke prediction for July 2026. I know it's been a couple weeks since we put out a video. I needed a little break, and I've also been working on the Kisei breakdown. I'm really trying to give some useful info on all 4 of Kisei's Makuuchi guys while not taking an hour and a half to do it, which is, let's call it a necessary challenge to myself. That will definitely be out before the Basho, but I may take my time to really make it as concise as possible. We'll see. In any case, when you're watching this, I should be in Iowa judging a whole bundle of Muay Thai fights. So while I'm busy with that, you all have a great day, and I'll see you soon.